The drum roll moment had arrived for their leader, or so the members thought. Instead, Akshata Murthy, the Prime Minister's wife, emerged from the shadows.
A bit of a surprise addition, shall we say, and a surprise for my husband too, who has no idea what I'm going to say.
The last partner deployed to introduce a party leader at conference was Gordon Brown's wife 15 years ago.
My best friend and your Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak.
The Tories' own polling shows a massive appetite amongst voters for change. Rishi Sunak, even though his party's been in power for 13 years, wants to convince voters he can give them that change.
It isn't anger. It's an exhaustion with politics. In particular, politicians saying things and then nothing ever changing. And you know what? People are right. Politics doesn't work the way it should. We've had 30 years of a political system which incentivises the easy decision, not the right one.
The Tories have been in power for more than half of those 30 years. And it's only a year since the party grassroots voted for Liz Truss instead of him, and for what he called, at the time, fairy tale economics.
As I did last summer, I will tell it as it is. I will lead in a different way. The facts are the facts. You can't borrow your way out of inflation.
The Prime Minister then announced the cancellation of Phase 2 of HS2. Some works have already begun, as on this leg of the extension near Lichfield. Rishi Sunak said the cost-benefit analysis had changed radically, and there were better things to do with the £36 billion allocated to finish the project.
I am cancelling the rest of the HS2 project, and in its place, we will reinvest every single penny, £36 billion, in hundreds of new transport projects in the North and the Midlands across the country.
Three of his Conservative predecessors in number 10 backed what he is halting. The party that cheered them in the past today cheered his reallocation of HS2 spending.
We'll build the Midlands rail hub, connecting 50 different stations. We'll help Andy Street extend the West Midlands metro. We'll build the Leeds tram. We'll electrify the North Wales main line, upgrade the A1, the A2, the A5, the M6. But there is more.
The Cabinet barely had time to read the plan before an emergency meeting giving formal sign-off this morning. Multi-billion-pound policy making at breakneck speed. David Cameron tweeted it was the wrong decision and would fuel concern. We are heading in the wrong direction as a country. Future generations would wonder how such an opportunity was lost. The Prime Minister then unveiled a plan to raise the legal age for buying cigarettes every year. There will be a free vote in Parliament. Liz Truss let it be known she'd vote against the law change.
I know not everyone in this hall will agree with me on this, but I've spent a long time weighing up this decision. Simply put, unlike all other legal products, there is no safe level of smoking. And what has ultimately swayed me is that none of us, not even those who smoke, want our children to grow up to be smokers.
His final big policy reveal, he wanted to phase out A-levels and T-levels over 10 years. Students would study 5 subjects in sixth form, including some form of maths and English course.
We will introduce the new rigorous, knowledge-rich, advanced British standard, which will bring together A-levels and T-levels into a new single qualification for our school leavers.
Rishi Sunak compared himself as a pharmacist's son to Margaret Thatcher, the grocer's daughter. And he said his background proved Britain was not a racist country.
Now, I am proud to be the first British Asian Prime Minister, but you know what? I'm even prouder that it's just not a big deal.
The Education Secretary shed a tear. The final message, a tough sell for a party long in power.
It is time for a change, and we are it. Thank you.
Rishi Sunak hopes his big policy moves will give a sense of change voters don't get from Keir Starmer's policy caution. But much of what Rishi Sunak's doing is ripping up some of the proudest achievements of recent Tory leaders. It's a political stretch that would challenge a contortionist, but Rishi Sunak thinks it's his best chance of staying in power. Gary Gibbon, Channel 4 News, at the Conservative Party conference in Manchester.
Well, just after the speech, I spoke to the Rail Minister, Hugh Merriman, and I put it to him that given the government used to say it would deliver HS2, these new transport pledges face a credibility problem.
Well, of course, with the HS2 budget, it has increased, and it's meant that other things we'd like to do, we're unable to do. So a difficult decision's had to be made, and the Prime Minister's taken that decision. So it's about spreading it across other parts of the North in particular, with the new Network North that we're focused on now. But I recognise we'll now need to get on with the job and demonstrate to people that we're doing it and it's the right thing to do.
But he listed off a load of things that you're going to do. I mean, will anybody believe any of it?
Well, there's £36 billion at play. The bulk of that will be spent up in the north to add improvements. And I'll give you one as an example, Christian. So Bradford, a city that has lost out in some of the recent changes that have been announced, now gets £2 billion towards the station and reduced journey times to Manchester from 55 minutes to 30 minutes. That's a real game changer for Bradford. It's about regeneration for them.
Right, so you've taken 36 billion out of the HS2 cancellation and you're spreading it around. So how much is the A1 going to cost?
Well, so that all falls within the almost £20 billion that's been allocated towards the north.
Yeah. How much is the
You've
A1?
then got almost £10 billion. Well, so the A1 costings will have to be sort of calculated out from a pot that we've dedicated towards roads funding and the budget for it. We've obviously already had it in the road investment strategies, but it's not been funded to be delivered because in the transport budget we keep losing out because HS2 budgets go up and we have to then remove other things. So again, Christian, there's a whole package of measures which we will be spreading across. I'm not going to stand here today and actually say, here's every single penny that's being spent in this way.
You see my point, don't you? That you don't know how much any of these things are going to cost in reality. You've reeled off a list of things, and you don't, in truth, know what they will cost, because just as HS2's costs spiralled, these costs could spiral, and then one day further down the road, you'd end up cancelling them.
Christian, I don't agree with that. So if you look, for example, at Euston, what we're looking to do there, again, by saving money, is to actually do it differently. Build it in the way that the Canary Wharf Development Corporation built Canary Wharf and get the private sector to actually deliver that. What he set out is the intention to do things differently and to take bold and tough decisions. So
why do you get the chance to do things differently when you've been in power for 13 years?
What he's setting out is saying we could just carry on as we are, but it's not working. So therefore, we're going to take the decision and make the call that we can spend that money from HS2 better across the North, the Midlands. And that will be for the voters to judge if they think that's the right thing to do. If they're in Hull, where all of a sudden they will get the change, be brought into the connection to Liverpool, they will see that as a benefit, whereas HS2 they wouldn't.
But he's talking about way beyond transport. He's talking about the whole way government works, and he's saying government doesn't work. You've been in government for 13 years.
He's not been in government 13 years. Him and I only got elected in 2015.
Oh, he was in Boris Johnson's government
for the last few years.
Yeah, he was the Chancellor.
Is it not good, Christian, that he's honest and says that people in this country don't feel that politics or politicians works for them, and it hasn't for the last 30 years? He is saying he wants to do things differently.
You're the ones under whom everything has been going wrong, and then you turn around and go, actually, we've just worked out that everything's been going wrong, and you expect everyone to give you another chance.
He's saying for the last 30 years, people have felt let down. But I tell you, he is a man, when he was Chancellor, who stood by people,
but
the
who has done the
workforce,
letting
businesses,
down? That's
and
the
he
point.
delivered for them.
You know, what you're admitting is you have let people down. That's what he's done today. He stood up and said, the last 13 years of Conservative government has let people down. And then he's standing up and saying, but I've just decided I want to change everything with no democratic mandate and go into the next election asking you to trust me again.
So his point is, we can do better. He's determined to do better. He's the Prime Minister. He's unleashed as far as his reformist zeal is concerned. And this is the platform he's setting out for the country. And it's a choice for them. And that's the beauty of democracy.
And that is the other point about this, isn't it? That this is really the beginning of the election campaign. You've laid out your stall. You've doled out a load of sweeties. You're challenging Labour to cancel those projects. It's very, very cynical politics.
Well, it depends if you're a cynical person. I tend to look at it, if that was the case, he would say, I'm doing HS2 and all these other things. What he's saying is there's a choice. and we have to be clear about it. And the choice is either carry on with a project that has gone over budget and has caused big challenges, or actually reverse it, make a bold call and spread that money across to the towns and cities in other parts of the country that hadn't benefited and will be benefiting by regeneration if that occurs, and he said he will. So it's not cynical, it's a question of him saying it's one thing or the other, and my view is we do it this way, and I think people will appreciate that kind of bold honesty in that situation rather than saying you can have it all. That wasn't what he was saying.
Hugh Merriman, thank you very much.
Thank you, Christian.
Well, for a decade now, plans for HS2 have been in progress, with many people along the proposed route required to sell land and property. Now the second leg has been cancelled. Many will be asking whether they'll be compensated for the years of disruption and uncertainty. Let's go now to our communities correspondent, Darshna Soni, who's in the village of Madeley in Staffordshire, close to where the tracks of the now defunct West Midlands to Manchester leg would have been laid. Darshna.
The work that's been done so far on HS2 has caused a lot of heartache here, Kathy. People have had to leave their homes. Farmers have seen swathes of their land dug up. This is a beautiful, picturesque village in Staffordshire. It's not far from Crewe, where HS2 would have run to. Now, it has to be said that station is looking a bit grubby. It could have done with the investment, as many commuters there said to me today. Rishi Sunak did offer sweeteners for towns like Crewe and others across the Midlands and the North, but for his critics, those sweeteners weren't enough. This is what the Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, had to say.
So what has been announced today is not a solution to the east-west bottleneck that we face on the railways in the north. It does not deliver that new line. It involves patching up existing lines and leaving us with a problem that still has not been fixed. So it doesn't work east-west.
But for many others in villages, including Madeley, today's announcement was welcome. They say their lives have been ruined over the last few years. I've been hearing some of their stories.
You can see the mess they've made of the ground.
So all this used to be maize?
Maize and corn.
But there is no more maize. Bernard Kettle has farmed this land for 50 years. For the last 2, this muddy track has been churned through the middle by HS2 contractors. So they were building a tunnel?
Tunnel comes through here, through the field, and across those other fields, through round to Crewe. Where the white buildings are, the station's over there.
The farm is around 100 acres, and around 40 of those acres were compulsory purchased for HS2.
I always had an ambition to have my own farm, and this was the first one that I bought.
How do you feel when you see what they've done to your land, all the churned up fields?
It's the... I daren't say it.
Go on, say it.
How can I put it? The imbeciles I've been dealing with who've got no common sense and don't understand farming. A plethora of experts or an expert in nothing.
Even the driveway leading up to Mr. Kettle's front door was purchased, meaning he had to get a licence to get access to his own home. The farm is in the picturesque village of Madeley in Staffordshire. Residents have long campaigned against plans to build a twin-bore tunnel here for the line, arguing that even the initial work has had a huge impact on their community. Some of the houses here are sitting empty because they'd already been compulsory purchased. Families who'd lived here for decades had to pack up and leave to make way for a railway line that's just been cancelled. No wonder then that in the village hall we found today's announcement got this reaction.
And so I'm ending this long running saga. I am cancelling the rest of the HS2.
Yes!
Thank God for that.
What's the stress been like on the village whilst all of this has been going on?
I think the main thing is the compulsory purchase of land and housing. People who've lived in these houses for years that have been basically kicked out of their own homes.
What about people who are saying it's really disappointing and this isn't what levelling up is supposed to be about?
I think it is going to be difficult for some areas who are expecting a huge economic impact to come from it. But I think you've got to look at the bigger picture, and I think one of the things that he did say in the speech, which I think is right, is that it isn't really the London to Manchester links that were the problem. It's always been getting across the country.
The line would have gone on to nearby Crewe and then up to Manchester. Some commuters here told us it's in desperate need of an upgrade.
Crewe's an old town, needs new railways, it needs new infrastructure.
There's disappointment on what we could have had, but again, I've learnt not to expect what we've promised.
So what will happen now to those whose land and homes have been compulsory purchased?
They're removing the welfare unit that's been here for the workmen.
A welfare unit, is that a toilet?
Yes.
The portable toilet was delivered just this morning for the HS2 contractors, but not long after Rishi Sunak's speech, it was driven away again. Mr Kettle hasn't been told if and when he'll be able to buy his land back.
I'm just a number and a name on a chart, a statistic. I'm a farmer who owns some land in the middle of the train, in the way of the trainway.
The Department of Transport told us any property no longer required will be sold, and they'll engage fully with those communities affected.
Darshana Soni there. So let's have a look at the ditched HS2 plans. What's being shelved, what will remain, and how much has it all cost? Our data correspondent Kieran Jenkins has been looking at some of the numbers.
HS2 was meant to be transformative. It was supposed to look like this, a bold Y-shaped statement of great British ambition, a new high-speed rail line connecting London to Birmingham with Leeds in the east and Manchester in the northwest. And crucially, these high-speed trains, the idea was that they would go on their own line, and that would free up space on our creaking Victorian train lines, increasing capacity and reducing congestion across the existing network. Now, that concept came from Gordon Brown's government in 2010 with a projected cost of around £30 billion. It was approved by David Cameron's coalition government, although by then the costs were more like £37.5 billion. In 2020, work on the London to Birmingham section began. In 2021, under Boris Johnson, the levelling up Prime Minister, HS2 to Leeds was scrapped. And the costs, the latest estimates last month show the total cost that was left of HS2 then at about £71 billion, up to £45 billion, the most expensive bit on the London to Birmingham section, up to £7 billion on Birmingham to Crewe, up to £19 billion on Crewe to Manchester. Those costs all in 2019 money, so before the rampant inflation, which means they would actually have been far higher. So what's left of HS2 after Rishi Sunak's speech? Well, new high-speed rail in the south will switch on to non-high-speed rail on existing lines in the north. What was intended to be a Y-shaped statement of British boldness will instead end up as a relatively short section of very expensive track. Now, Rishi Sunak says he'll spend £36 billion, no longer earmarked for HS2, on new transport schemes instead. Much of that will go on filling in potholes in England. £8.3 billion, in fact, almost a quarter of the so-called HS2 money for new projects. But how new are these projects? Well, Rishi Sunak says he would upgrade the A1, a promise made by former Prime Minister David Cameron in 2010. Rishi Sunak says Bradford will have a new station, a station that was scrapped by Boris Johnson in 2021, reinstated by Liz Truss in 2022, scrapped again by Rishi Sunak himself last year, which is now reinstated. He's also promising £12 billion more connecting Liverpool and Manchester and full electrification between Manchester and Hull, which sounds awfully familiar to plans for Northern Powerhouse Rail, first announced in 2014. There are many more projects, including a new tram system, long mooted here in Leeds. Rishi Sunak says they will happen and they will be funded. But that's what they said about HS2.
Well, joining me now in Leeds, the Mayor of West Yorkshire, Tracy Brabin, and the Chief Executive of the Northern Powerhouse Partnership, Henry Murison. Tracy Brabin first, let's just zoom in on some of the £36 billion that's now going to be spent on local transport projects in the north of England. £3.3 billion for potholes, £2.5 billion for trams here in Leeds, train lines electrified and so on. Rishi Sunak said today, I challenge anyone to tell me with a straight face that all of that isn't what the north really needs. Do you accept that challenge?
Well, it's great that he's saying it's what the north needs. How would he know? He's not spoken to us. Not one leader in the north has been in that room when they've come up with this plan.
And so you didn't have a single call from the Prime Minister or his staff?
No, we're not involved at all. And actually, we could be helpful. We could help solve a lot of these problems. This doesn't work for north to south. It doesn't work east to west. And what we're seeing in this plan is a decade of rail replacement buses with electrification.
Do you not believe you're going to get some of this 36 billion on these local projects? You know, trams in Leeds sounds great.
Well, part of the problem is there's no timeframes for the money, and certainly none of the work is going to happen until the next election. And let's not forget, we're slightly cynical because we've been promised so much by a Conservative government. Northern Powerhouse Rail, for example, has been promised by Prime Ministers, has been in manifestos, has pulled. We actually are struggling to trust these figures. We don't quite understand them. Obviously, it's all going to be devil's in the detail.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, it feels like just pure electioneering.
Henry Murison, is that how you see it? Do you think that Network North, as it's being called, you know, east-west links, for example, Bradford to Manchester in 30 minutes, sounds good? Do you think it's deliverable?
The challenge, as Tracy said, is the devil is in the detail and the delivery. So I'm always really excited to hear politicians make bold promises to the north of England. But I've only been doing this 6 years, and I've heard an awful lot of promises from an awful lot of Prime Ministers. And I've learned to be a little bit sceptical about some of if there isn't the detail, but actually what is really behind it. And particularly on the case of the hybrid bill, that we need to build a section of track between Manchester and Manchester Airport. The first phase of Northern Powerhouse Rail that was supposed to be new line, there are upgrades that can be done, but the first section of new line that was ever going to be built, originally part of HS2, the government's not giving clarity that hybrid bill won't be cancelled because either they proceed with the whole bill all the way to Crewe,
right,
or we can't build the section between Manchester Airport and Piccadilly. Without that section, we can't get trains from here in Leeds across to Liverpool, which is fundamental to that cross-Pennine vision.
So you obviously have to pore over the detail, but isn't there some merit to jam today or close to today?
Jam is definitely tomorrow. It is definitely not today.
But it's sooner than it would have been under HS2.
Well, is it? Certainly, we've been waiting for decades for TransPennine upgrade, the electrification of Manchester to Leeds, and the station in Bradford. We've been calling for as long as I've been mayor, that's for sure. We absolutely need that new line between Manchester and Leeds with that through station in Bradford. And as your package alluded to, the Prime Minister talks about towns, but you can't have connectivity in towns if you have speeding trains commuting between cities. So you need that extra capacity, and that's where HS2 came in.
Some of it could be sooner than HS2, the smaller local projects.
Unfortunately, that's not really the case, because even in this country for small schemes, our good friends at the Treasury make that take ages as well. And I think my reflection would be that, remember, HS2 would have got to Manchester and would have got to Crewe, and many elements of Northern Powerhouse Rail, like the line we want to see that would give that through line, for example, from Bradford down to Huddersfield, connecting on to a line that would then take you into Manchester.
Right.
Well, to do that, that is just a line on a map. It's going to take a long time to plan it, whereas HS2 was already happening. And that's the difference. We're giving away, we're being asked to give away something that was already happening for something that could happen at any time in the future.
So
and that isn't a straight choice. It can't be a straight choice
so the big challenge to you, Tracy, is would a future Labour government, would you like to see them doing both, all these local projects we've heard about today, plus HS2?
Well, two things. Firstly, as a Labour mayor, we're getting on with it. So we are already underway with mass transit. And
the tram system.
The tram system, the West Yorkshire mass transit. He called it the Leeds tram. I was very annoyed. It's West Yorkshire. But also, secondly, obviously, Labour are going to have to look at the devastation that is left. If they pull the hybrid bill, then obviously all timeframes slip. And part of this problem of the escalating costs is because of this flip-flopping, this delay, this handbrake turn is not helping us when we're selling West Yorkshire or the North to the rest of the world.
But do you think the Labour leadership can keep some of these projects that you're already getting on with and do HS2, or are they going to have to axe HS2? You know, they won't be able to reinstate it, that's what I'm saying.
Well, they won't be able to reinstate it if this hybrid bill doesn't go through, because there won't be the infrastructure
through, would you like to see them reinstate it in full?
Well, of course, and there will be conversations about phasing and conversations about what comes first. But absolutely, we've heard Keir and Rachel Reeves and others talk about the value of these infrastructure projects on the global stage that make us investable.
Well, they'll be spending the £36 billion twice then, because you're not going to let go of your tram system here.
I think, Cathy,
Well, the 36 billion, I mean, we know that Labour have already committed to mass transit, and that they know that the impact of mass transit. Leeds is a city, the only city of its size without mass transit. They know the value of these big infrastructure projects. We saw it in America. We know that a Labour government will deliver on infrastructure.
Henry, there's a suggestion that the HS2 could be done by a private sector consortium. Yes. Andy Street, the West Midlands Mayor, is looking at that. Do you think that's possible?
So I've been speaking to a number of the businesses involved, to Arup, to a number of the other businesses like Arcadis, who came forward to help Andy with that proposition. I do think there are a number of investors who would be interested in finishing HS2 and operating the system as a joined-up railway, because if you built the most expensive part of the public expense, that does give you an asset you can leverage to bring in further investment. And I know that a number of former Tory Transport Secretaries that I've been with in Manchester this week did advise the government to consider that option. And although I'm really glad that Euston's been saved, we work with Business London to make that case because it is good for the North. If there are enough platforms, I'm not sure there are enough platforms, but it's, in principle, a step in the right direction. But as well as listening to Andy Street on Euston, they should have listened to him on the fact that finishing HS2 was the right thing, and they also should listen to other Conservative figures who were saying privately and now much more publicly that private investment would have been a better thing to consider before walking away from such an important project.
Maybe it can be salvaged. Henry Murison and Tracy Braden, thank you both very much for joining us. Now,